Okay, so very warm welcome to the 11th, I would say, our Dhamma class, which is fully focused on the Buddha and his Dhamma. And before we begin, we will chant our traditional formula. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. As we were studying the first discourse of the Buddha to the five Parivrajak, and Baba Saheb Ambedkar has very nicely divided the first sermon into three sort of path. We have seen the path of virtue, path of purity, path of righteousness, and today we are going to look at the path of virtue. And as I was telling you that these three paths are very important dimensions of even the 22 vows. And if we understand this section of the Buddha and his Dhamma, it is like understanding the whole of the Buddha and his Dhamma, because the whole Dhamma is contained in these three paths that Baba Ambedkar has divided into three important parts. So the section 5 is about what is called the path of virtue. It is a continuation of the first sermon the Buddha gave to the five Pariprajakas. And traditionally, this path of virtue is called the path of paramitas. Now, paramita is a very interesting word, because a bodhisattva is supposed to have practiced all the 10 paramitas that we have seen in the previous sections of the Buddha and his Dhamma, as to how the bodhisattva becomes a Buddha and what kind of virtues that a bodhisattva has to practice in order to become the Buddha. So paramita means the other side of the river. It means the other bank. And the Buddha says that if we want to cross this river, we have to go to the other bank of the river, and it's not easy to go to the other bank of the river. And therefore paramita can also mean that somebody who has crossed over the what is called the realm of suffering and has gone to the other shore. So this going forth from this shore to that shore, and that shore is called paramita. So paramita is also a very interesting word, because that is considered to be the heart of what we call in Mahayana Buddhism, the goal of the bodhisattva to practice paramitas. And therefore, I think this section is very important. And in a way, Baba Ambedkar has brought three strands together through the path of purity. Baba Ambedkar has brought the concept of Sila, which is very important in Buddhism, as a kind of a foundation of the Buddha's teachings. And as we go along with the other chapters, the more and more sort of ideas will be clear to us. And then we have this very practical path, the path of Noble Eightfold Path, that we have seen in a full view in the last class, which is very self-explanatory, in the sense that if we read it through and through, we can understand a lot of things there. And today we are going to look at the path of virtue, the path of paramitas, or I would say paramitas. So Shila, Ashtanga Marga, and today we are going to look at the paramitas. So traditionally, there are 10 paramitas. According to the Theravada tradition, there are 10 paramitas, and according to the Mahayana tradition, there are 6 paramitas. And we also see the reference of 6 paramitas in the Buddha and his Dhamma as we go into the details in the next chapters. But today, we are going to follow what Baba Ambedkar has enumerated here in terms of the 10 paramitas. And all these 10 paramitas are very important virtues that we all need to put in practice. And it begins with dana. But here Baba Ambedkar has begun with what is called Shila. And we know Sila. We have seen the path of the Sila comes every often and then in Buddhism. If we have to condense the whole teachings of the Buddha into a simple threefold teaching, it is like Shila, Samadhi, and Prajna. Okay, and all Noble Eightfold Path can be condensed into the Shila, Samadhi, and Prajna, and all the Buddha's teachings can be condensed into the Shila, Samadhi, and Prajna. So it actually began with Sila here, and then the second virtue, the second paramita is the Dana paramita, the third is Upekka paramita, the fourth is Nekkhamma paramita, and 5 is Virya, 6 is Khanti, and 7 is Satya, 8 Adhishtan, 9 Karuna, and 10 Maitri. Now, see, these are not mere words that Baba Sahib Ambedkar has enlisted here, because most of the times we tend to see the lists here, the list of 8 noble, the wings of the Noble Eightfold Path, or 5 silas, and 10 paramitas. But we have to bear in mind that these are like these are pedagogical tools where you enlist different concepts so that it will be easy for us to keep a track of them, memorize them. So that's one way of teaching in terms of the list. But what we have to see the connections, interconnections between all these elements of the Buddha's teachings, because that's we have to bear in mind that we are not just looking at the sort of list of certain items. So here we have the list of 10 items, but one item is linked to other items, and we can find the linkages between all these virtues. So, for example, Sila is self-explanatory. We have talked about Sila in the last chapter. We have seen it at length as to how Baba Ambedkar has emphasized when he divided the teachings of the Buddha into 3, like the path of purity. So Sila is, of course, the path of purity, and we are going to see more and more of Sila in the Buddha and his Dhamma, and in the Buddha's Dhamma. It's a foundation. Sila it also mean the foundation, because when we say the foundation of anything, we say Kona Shila or something. So it's a foundation. Without the foundation of Shil, one cannot make a progress. So as Baba Ambedkar has explained very nicely here, and I think these definitions we have to study carefully. And here what Baba Ambedkar has also, from one dimension talked about Shila in terms of moral temperament. It's actually a temperament. It's an attitude. It is the disposition. See, it's not just some kind of a practice, because of course we have to put in practice the 5 precepts. But on another level, the Shila is a moral temperament. It's our temperament. It's an attitude. It's the disposition not to do evil and the disposition to do good. Now, this is very important, that these are not just a behavioral sort of practices, but it's actually the change in our disposition, actually the way we cultivate our attitude, as to how we cultivate our moral temperament. I think these words are very important. From the psychological point of view, if we look at the words like disposition and moral temperament, they actually talk about very deeper changes in our minds. They are not superficial imitations of certain practices, but they indicate a kind of turning within us, which effectively transforms our attitudes. And as I was telling you, that Baba Ambedkar had this very unique way of presenting the Buddha's teaching for the modern people, so that they can understand it very clearly. So, there are many definitions of the Shila, and one of the very interesting sort of definition is like, Sila is moral temperament. It's an attitude. It's the disposition not to do evil and the disposition to do good. To be ashamed of doing wrong. Now, this is very important. Actually, in Buddhism, there is no scope for what is called the guilt, because in the religions like Christianity, they often talk about the original sin, that we are born sinners, and the guilt. And it's said that the element of guilt is so much in the Christian traditions, and of course I'm not an authority on that, but if you are told that you are impure from the beginning, or you are a sinner from the beginning, then it's very, the next emotions comes from that is you feel very low about yourself. But here the word is to be ashamed of doing wrong, which means there are 2 traditional technical terms here we can bring, and you can study it further. They are called hiri and ottappa. Like, one is shameful about oneself, not in because when one has some higher standards And if we don't accord with that, we naturally feel shameful about it. And also we are ashamed of what the other people will think. It is called in traditional Indian languages, Atma Lajja and Paralajja, Loka Lajja. So these two are like, these two are pillars which guide our moral disposition, because otherwise we would do anything that we will feel that, we should do. More and more we can talk about it, but I think this is very important that Baba Ambedkar has also brought in this dimension of Shila in terms of to be ashamed of wrongdoing, doing wrong, to avoid to do evil for fear of punishment is Shila. Because you see, if we are not having the fear, I'm not saying that we should be fearful all the time, but we should have a fear of the consequences of the actions we do with wrong mind and wrong speech and wrong body. So of course, it leads to punishment. Like sometimes it is said that the 5 precepts, if we don't, they are like the bedrock of the law, the modern law itself, that we cannot if we want to be a lawful citizen of the world, the 5 precepts are the natural sort of behavior that we all ourselves should commit to the path. So I think these are very important. And then another definition that Baba Ambedkar goes into about Shila is fear of doing wrong. We should be fearful of doing wrong. And these are not ordinary fears, because, of course, the Buddha is giving us the abhaya. He's asking us not to be fearful. And this mudra of abhaya means not to be fearful. We see it often that Buddha is doing like this, means he's offering, he's telling us not to fear, not to have any bhaya, to be abhaya. And I think if our disposition is to do good to the world, if our disposition is to be, have to cultivate that moral temperament, then I think that the fearlessness comes automatically out of that. And that is one of the reasons that Baba Ambedkar was so fearless, is because of his vinaya, is because of his, the moral temperament, because he had nothing to do for himself, he had everything to do for others. And I think with that attitude comes the fearlessness, in any assembly, whether it's in parliament, it's a public meeting, or, in personal meeting, the person like Baba Ambedkar is fearless, and they roar like a lion because of that fearlessness that comes from their deep moral temperament of doing good to the world. And I think that's very important. See, one of the beauties of Baba Ambedkar's writings, not just Buddha and his Dhamma, is the clarity. Because most of the times Baba Ambedkar dealt with very complex concepts, and he knew that, he has to clarify a lot so that people can understand. And likewise, we see that in the Buddha and Dhamma, we see that Baba Ambedkar has defined Sila in one particular way at one place, and at another place in another particular way. And, we have to bring all these definitions together and form a matrix of those definitions so that we understand the concepts from it multivariant points. And I think that's very important, that we understand the Sila not just as a kind of a practice that we have to do following the social conventions, but because it has a deep implications in terms of remaining fearless in our lives, and, in terms of cultivating that disposition towards the other human being. So here a little bit change in the sequence. I think it's an editorial mistake that the 7 should be dana. So let's look at dana. So what is dana? Dana means the giving of one's possessions, blood and limbs, and even one's life for the good of others without expecting anything in return. Now see, actually the Buddha's Dhamma, if it begins anywhere, it begins with the practice of dana, because dana is a very deep and very profound concept. So the profundity of the practice of dana lies in the practice, in the insight into the nature of our own existence. So as the Buddha said, when we meditate upon our mind and body deeply, we find that there is no permanent self that we can find out. There is no something which remains constant throughout. And as an implication of that, there is no territory between you and others. There is no territory from, that can separate us and others. And that profound experience of interdependence that comes through when we realize the nature of our bodies and mind, leads to the automatic practice of dana, because we don't hold on to any territory of ours. We don't hold on to anything called myself or mine or me. And if we don't hold on to anything like as belonging to me, as myself, as I, then what happens is the spontaneous response of that experience is the practice of giving. And the practice of giving is such a deep practice that we spontaneously give. We don't think twice or thrice before giving. We don't think it. It just happens spontaneously. The act of giving happens spontaneously. And as I said, that the concept of dana in Buddhism is not like this, that if we make donations, then our karmas will be purified. Whatever sins we have committed will be purified. It's not like that. It's a very deep concept, and we have to understand that the dana, the practice of dana, is a spontaneous response to other human beings, to the needs of other human beings, when we realize that there is no fundamental difference between me and others. And I think that's very important. That's very important. I would recommend not to write comments, because it's very distracting. Just pay attention to what we are doing at the moment. Okay. And we have a space to discuss at the end of the talk. So I would request not to, write anything in the chat box when the class is going on. So what is important at this moment is to understand that there are various levels of dana, and we can see Baba Ambedkar has referred to some of the types of dana, like giving of one's possessions. So we don't hold on to even our material possessions. We just give spontaneously whatever belongs to us. We see the needs of the people and we give spontaneously. We give our own material possessions. And very important that we give life to others. So for example, the donation of the blood, the donation of our limbs. And we have seen that in the Jataka tales, if we read the Jataka tales carefully, what happens in the Jataka tales is that they are full of the practice of paramitas in the Jataka tales. Okay, so the very important thing is that we are not afraid to give our lives for the sake of others. And where can we see that example of a person sacrificing his life for the sake of others, other than the life of Baba Ambedkar? He never cared for his life. If we study, I would say that when we read these paramitas, we keep Baba Ambedkar's life in front of our eyes, so that we get a very concrete example of what it means by the practice of path of virtue. So the dana which also means giving one's life for the sake of others. There is another type of dana which is like giving the knowledge to the others. And then there is a life of there is another type of dana which is like abhay dana. So we give confidence to the others. Whenever we act in such a way that there is confidence among the people that we are living with. So that's another type of dana, fearlessness, the dana of fearlessness. And the foremost among the dana is the dana of the Dhamma. It is said in the Pali text that the sabbadanang dhammadanang jinati. If among the all givings, the giving of the Dhamma surpasses everything. Because when we give the Dhamma to others, what happens is that we are giving them the ultimate medicine to heal their sufferings. We give them the ultimate sort of tools to deal with their lives. We give them the ultimate path to their emancipation. We give them the ultimate opportunity to uplift themselves from whichever situation they are right now. So I think this dana itself can be deeply studied, and I would very much recommend you to study them deeply. There are a lot of literature available here, and we can branch out from Buddha and Dhamma and look at what is this dana, what are the various types of dana, and so on and so forth. Then there is nekkhamma, is a renunciation of the pleasures of the world. So according to the Buddha, there are two types of sukha. One is a kam sukh and another is a nekkhamma sukh. And Buddha says that the nekkhamma sukh surpasses the kama sukh. And what is nekkhamma? Nekkhamma is like giving up the temporary pleasures of the life. And as I was telling you in the past, that the Buddhism is a Dhamma, is a religion of joy. It has to be full of joy. A person who is a Buddhist, his life, is not necessarily a wretched life. It's a full of joy. So very interestingly, what I find here is renunciation of the pleasures of the world. And we know that it's not easy to renunciate the pleasures of the world. On the contrary, our minds are so much entangled into the what I would say in the sensual pleasures that we are like caught in a net of the sensuality. And therefore I think this renunciation of the pleasures of the world is a very important word, nekkhamma. And this word also comes in other religions also, but in Buddhism it has to be contrasted with the what is called the kama sukha and nekkhamma sukha. And Buddha says that both gives you whatever happiness, but of these two sukhas, the nekkhamma sukha, the joy of giving up the sensuality or sensual pleasures is the ultimate joy. And therefore nekkhamma as a renunciation, because we cannot attend to all the sensuality in the world, that's not possible. But if our mind is free of this hankering after pleasures, then it's also one of the very important paramitas. And why I think it's important is because this 10 sort of dimensions of the paramitas, as I was telling you, Buddhism is a path of training. It's a part of education. We have to, it's not that some magical wand is there and somebody will utter something and we will be free from suffering. It's not that. We have to make our own efforts. And the paramitas are in that direction, that the path of virtue, everything is designated with the word path. It's a path, and path means that we have to walk, and that walking means giving up what is called the renunciation of the pleasures of the world. And the word is nekkhamma. As I was telling you, that this all the words in Buddhism, they are not mere words, but like in the scientific domain we have certain terms, and the terms had a lot of meaning behind them, and they have we have to understand. For example, the word like force, we in physics we have to understand it in a particular way. Just like that, in Buddhism, when the words like nekkhamma or upekha or virya, when they are used, they are not just used as the nouns, but they are like the terms, and terms in a particular domain of a thinking or practice. That is what that we call the Buddhism. So nekkhamma is a renunciation of the pleasures, and we will follow this sequence that Baba Ambedkar had given. Virya is a right endeavor. So virya is a right endeavor in the sense we have seen the glimpses of virya when we have seen in the path of righteousness. We have gone into the virya in Vayamo, in Samma Vayamo we have seen right endeavor, and here virya is a right endeavor. So the Vayamo, the right exertion, and virya are the same things. So what is virya? It's like doing all, it's doing with all your might whatever you have undertaken to do, with never a thought of turning back whatever you have undertaken to do. Now see, this is why this is important, is because without virya nothing is possible. And virya means an energy. It's an attitude of going forth no matter what. And we see that in the life of the Buddha. Buddha was never afraid. He was never shaken. He just went ahead with whatever he wanted to accomplish in his life. Same with Baba Ambedkar. He was so steadfast in whatever he did that he never fall back. And I think that that paramita of virya paramita, as we can say, is so much inbuilt in the lives of the great beings in the world. They are never afraid. They want to put all their energies to whatever they have undertaken to do, with never a thought of turning back whatever you have undertaken to do. And I think this is very significant, that the path of virtue has virya in its heart, in a sense that without virya nothing is possible. Without that energy to go forth, without that energy to challenge whatever barriers we have in front of us. And I think that's very significant. The ninth is a khanti, and in traditional Indian languages we can call it shanti paramita, khanti paramita in Pali. It's forbearance. Not to meet hatred by hatred is the essence of it. For hatred is not appeased by hatred, it is appeased only by forbearance. Ability to forbear, ability, I would say, even to undergo the periods of intense, I would say, suffering, but without being shaken by that. Just look at the example of Baba Saheb Ambedkar. He had to suffer so much because the whole entire Indian press is against him. The whole society is against him. People are abusing, hurling, all the abuses on him, so much of mudslinging on him and whatnot. He has to undergo whatnot. It's unthinkable for people like us who are living a relatively comfortable life than compared to Baba Saheb Ambedkar or the other beings in the community and in the world. And that means that they have the ability to suffer, not get bogged down by the circumstances, not get bogged down by the hatred of others. And once Baba Saheb Ambedkar said that he was the most hated man in this country, and which is very true in a sense of the praise dominated by the caste Hindus, and so much abuses hurling at him. And I'm sure that nobody can be above that. But naturally suffer. And so it means that enduring, that endurance. I would say that Khanti is the power of endure, that you are ready to endure anything. You are ready to endure the hatred of others with but you don't respond the hatred of others with the hatred, but with what Baba Saheb Ambedkar call not appeased by hatred. So forbearance, I think it's very important paramita, and we need to cultivate this paramita at the highest, not to get swayed by what is happening, what other people say about us or whatever. Then 10th is very important. Satya paramita. Satya is truth. A person must never tell a lie. His speech must be truth and nothing but truth. And we have seen the power of speech, which is a very important part of the Noble Eightfold Path. And as we have seen that Baba Saheb Ambedkar has devoted a considerable portion of the path to righteousness on the right speech. And here as a paramita, Satya paramita, I think we cannot say more than this, that a person must never tell a lie. His speech must be truth and nothing but the truth. And that's, you can see that these paramitas are not easy to practice. They are like, the higher standards. They are like so difficult to practice. And but we have to do that. The 11th is, of course, Adhishtan, is a resolute determination to reach the goal. I think this word has a very beautiful ring around it. And in the traditional Indic languages, we can call it Adhishtan, but in Pali, we call it Adhiktan. And Adhiktan is resolute determination to reach the goal. So once we have settled on something, we want to achieve something, and we have that goal in front of us, it's like, unshakable determination. That determination cannot be shaken. It's like firmly established. It's like, as Baba Saheb Ambedkar has used these two beautiful words, resolute determination to reach the goal. Karuna is, of course, more talked about, and we have been talking about Karuna in all our lessons. And we have seen how, Karuna was like the, I would say, the fundamental note of the Buddha's life. And here, Baba Saheb Ambedkar says that Karuna is loving kindness to human beings. Maitri is extending fellow feeling to all beings, not only to one who is a friend, but also to one who is a foe. Not only to man, but to all living beings. Maitri and Karuna, we can go on talking about them at length. And they are such a virtues that particularly the virtue of Karuna, when we see that gentleness in the universe, where we see that the universe is not hostile to us, because we have a general feeling that because when we have this deep sense of self-I, we see other things as not self. And by the virtue of not seeing the other things as not self, what happens is that we are constantly think that the universe around us, world around us, is a hostile world, but it's not so. The world around us can be very gentle, and it all depends on this how we cultivate this practice of metta. And I think this word is very important when Baba Saheb Ambedkar defines it. Maitri is extending fellow feelings. What is a fellow feeling? What is it to feel that we other people are our fellow beings? that we belong to the same sort of, life, and we belong to the same sort of an experiential world, and we all undergo our own trials in the world, and we all have the same fears of death, and fear of punishments, and fear of being looked down upon. And I think this fellow feeling is so important, that it's the word here is a feeling. And most of the times when we look at Buddhism, it's mostly treated as a rational sort of a way to understand the things. It's true that Buddhism is rational. It's true that Buddhism is logical. It's true that Buddhism can satisfy the test of logic. It's true. But to a larger extent, when Buddha talked about the Maitri and Karuna, there is a very gentle dimension which is not often looked at, is the realm of feelings. And we are all just not rational beings. We are rational beings. We are not just rational. We have this very deep component of feelings within us, and we feel suffering, we feel insults, we feel so many things. And I think the balm or the medicine on all those feelings that causes us innumerable suffering, or the social suffering, the medicine is Maitri. And I think this is very profound, in a sense that if the importance of Maitri is so much in Baba Saheb's scheme of the things, that he has equated Maitri with the social democracy, the fellow feeling. You feel for other human beings. Even to feel for other human beings is important. And somewhere Baba Ambedkar has said that indifferentism, not feeling anything, is the worst kind of disease. We have to feel something. We either feel love or hate, but we have to feel something. And I think these feelings are so important, that they have a power to change, or they have the power to transform us into more better human beings. Because without, we cannot just go forth based on the basis of rationality, or based on the basis of mere thinking. We need to back it with the power of feelings. Anything has to be backed up by the power of feelings, and any feeling has to be backed up by the power of will. There is a very important and very significant role of will in Buddhism. That's the Buddha says in one place that it's the will of the people that sets in motion the things in the world. So whatever we will, whatever we intend to do, that has such a profound effect on the world. So I think from that realm of feeling, I think most our 90% of our lives are in the realm of feelings. In the realm of what we can say Vedana. If you want to again go, if you want to go into technicalities of it, we can go further. Like, for example, just to digress a bit, Buddha says that we have three kinds of feelings. One is the feeling of we like something and we get very indulged into that. That's one feeling. And there is something, we hate something and we want to push that thing away. And we have a feeling which is no feeling at all, no pleasure, no pain. And that is called a neutral feeling. So there is a realm where we want to indulge into something, and the Buddha equates it with what is one of the poisons of raga, where we want to indulge into something so much that we get blinded. We get lost in that cycle of the sensuality, that we lose sight of the reality that is more bigger than that. The second is, we don't like something so much that we want to push it away, and it is the feeling of dosa, dvesh, hatred. We want to even destroy that object. And thirdly, that there is no pain and no pleasure. So there is just ignorant sort of acceptance of everything. Likewise, this feeling of liking, neurotic liking of something can be transformed into the practice of love towards all. And I think this feeling of destroying something, the hatred, can be transformed, into something that destroys all the negativity in the world. And the feeling of not feeling anything can be transformed into, I think very important is that can be transformed into the total awareness of whether, it's pleasant or unpleasant, but, total awareness of the entire spectrum of feelings. So I think, to short circuit all those realm of spirit, realm of feelings into more plausible way of feeling for the world is the feeling of fellow feeling, metta. And I think metta is very profound in Buddhism. It's not mere friendship, because Maitri in the traditional Hindi or English in the Marathi language it has a very limited connotation of being friends with somebody. But Maitri has this very extensive use of extending fellow feelings to all beings, not only to one who is a friend, but also to one who is a foe, not only to man, but to all living beings. So we can see that, this very extensive, I would say the limitless, the boundless feeling of feeling for others, which has no limits whatsoever. It just smashes any barrier to that feeling to accept everybody. Not only the human beings, but also the other living beings as, as our fellows. The 14th is upekka, is detachment as distinguished from indifference. So see, there is indifference, and Baba Ambedkar is against indifferentism. He says that indifferentism is a disease. No society can make a progress, and that is the disease which is ultimately related to a lot of people with the middle class mentalities, that people are becoming so indifferent to the sufferings of others. We ourselves, when we live in a certain comfort zone, we become so indifferent to the feelings of others. So, indifferentism is, of course, not to be lauded in the Ambedkarite scheme of the things. But there is a word which is very beautiful. The word is upekha, is detachment as distinguished from indifference. It is a state of mind where there is neither like nor dislike. Now see, whatever I was talking to you before about not getting indulged into liking or not getting indulged into disliking. So what is upekha? There are many dimensions to upekha. One of the dimensions of upekha, when it comes to the four highest dwellings, like metta, karuna, mudita, upekha. Upekha is the highest stage where, all these values are cultivated, boundlessly. That's one definition of upekha. But here is, I think, very practical definition for all of us. So what is upekha? Is detachment as distinguished from indifference. It is a state of mind where there is neither like nor dislike. Okay, so you don't get swayed by liking or disliking. Okay, remaining unmoved by the result and yet engaged in the pursuit of it. Now see, why upekha is important? Because the whole sort of, our life's efforts, even if we put into eradicating the suffering of the world, our lives are not enough, in a sense of the mountain of suffering that we all see around us. So, it's upekha is an ability to go forth and forth limitlessly. You see, there is no end to our efforts. There is no end to practicing the path of paramitas. Like there will be a situation where everything is all goody-goody. It's not going to happen like that. We have to constantly, forever, we have to pursue it. Even there might be a small accomplishments on our road, but we cannot just be satisfied with that. We cannot say that, okay, this is what I have done is enough. This is what it is to be done. So upekha, in a sense, is actually the never-ending pursuit of something. It's like you accomplish something today, and then there is another target, then there is another target, and so on and so forth. So there is no end to that engagement. And then upekha means something that, it means that I would say the continuous striving, the continuous unending striving for, what Baba Ambedkar has said, results. Certain times we get certain results and we get so, so much attached to the results themselves that we don't want to go forth. And remaining unmoved by the result, even if the result is positive or negative, we don't care. We don't care what is the result. We actually, in the sense that we say that, we don't become sentimental about it. We don't become, I would say, too much emotional about the results. Whatever is the result, good or bad, it doesn't matter to us. We just forge ahead. We don't worry about the outcome of the results. We don't see that, this will succeed or not succeed. We just go on doing action. We just go on doing, our efforts. We just go on pursuing our goal, come what may, without standing still. It might be a little bit digression, but in 2014, certain political events happened in this country, and some of the people I knew went into depression so much that they couldn't, rise from that kind of a shock, and they thought that it's the end of the game for the communities and so on and so forth. Even today, we think that a lot of things are happening in such a way that that's the end of the game for the community. It's not like that. It is never going to be like that. So long as we have this upekha, so that we have these paramitas with us. No situation is hopeless, and we are going to see that no situation is hopeless. We can always forge ahead. We can always, because as Baba Ambedkar said, what human mind has done can be undone. And as a Buddhist, if we understand that everything is arising out of this mind, and mind is a very broader term in Buddhism. It's not just a word. It is not just a noun. It's a broader category. We have to think about mind with a lot of definitions. So I think upekha is a very important virtue. Even on the community level, it's very important virtue that we celebrate the small success. It's okay to celebrate the small successes. But sometimes we get bogged down by the small failures, and that failures leads to further downfall. While what Baba Ambedkar is saying, that we don't care, we just forge ahead. It doesn't matter, the result doesn't matter. We don't get moved by the result. We remain engaged in the pursuit of it. Now the 15th, and these virtues one must practice to his utmost capacities. Now these virtues we have to give our full to practice them, utmost capacity. That is why they are called paramitas, states of perfection. So you see why we are taking so much time to understand this section. As I told you that if understood properly, this threefold path, the path of purity, the path of righteousness, the path of virtue, they form the very foundation of the Buddha's Dhamma. In fact, they contain all the Buddha's Dhamma. We cannot find any Buddha Dhamma as separate from these three paths. They are essential to Buddhism, and they are essential Buddhism. So the path of paramitas, and we need a concrete example before our eyes as to what is a bodhisattva like. And I often encourage all of you to read the life of Baba Ambedkar and see for yourselves as to how much the perfections he has attained in terms of his life. Look at his sila, in terms of his actual being in the world. Look at his dana. He sacrificed everything. Whatever he had, he sacrificed everything for the community. There are so many examples of his sacrifice. His ability to forbear, khanti paramita. A man other than him would have left this, this striving long time back. So much of trouble around him. Then you look at his adhishtan. Once he resolved something, he did it. His resolution was such a high level. He was so much committed. He was so much resolved, and the determination was so unshakable that he said that I will kill myself if I don't, bring my community to the path of emancipation. You see the adhishtan of Baba Ambedkar. You see the metta and karuna of Baba Ambedkar. You see, his upekha. He is not moved by the results. He doesn't care. He just goes further. And I think this path of virtue is a kind of, I would say, a matrix or a standard through which we can look at Baba Saheb Ambedkar himself. And I think, if we have this kind of a concrete example before us, actually a life that was lived according to these principles, then we get something as a way for us to, to have that ideal to strive for. And many often times we have this statements coming from the people all over that, we have this very strong affiliation with Baba Ambedkar, and I think that's rightly so, because, whatever we want to become, we should have an ideal in front of us. So a photo of Baba Ambedkar, if understood through this matrix of the 10 paramitas, gives a kind of a basis for our lives to, to have a direction, to have that striving, to even, I would say, to have that physical embodied goal, in front of our lives. And I think that is the beauty of these paramitas, and that is the beauty of the doctrine of bodhisattvas, and that is the path of perfection, paramitas. So I think I will stop here today, and we will have open discussion now. And why I don't recommend any chatting in between is because I want you to, there is a time for everybody to, comment on and think of. And I think you should maximally use that period of 20 minutes to comment, to share, and, to even reflect on whatever has been said in the 40 minutes beforehand. So let's open it up and we will discuss. Alka madam, anything you want to contribute? Sunil bhai, Pankaj?
Hello.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm Dr. Sunanda Bhide. I would like to say something.
Yes.
I first of all, I would like to thank you for taking this session, because I had read Buddhist Dhamma before. That time, what I have understood, and now after listening to you, what I understood is much different. You made it so interesting and so nicely you are explaining it. So I think it should be explained to each and every person. And the understanding should be there with everyone, that it will definitely make a very good impact. So thank you very much for having this session. And I'm so eager to listen to the further sessions also. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Thank you. I think that's our goal in the class, Sai, to be able to train people so that, they can go and, share their learnings of the Buddha and Dhamma. Just give me 1 minute. Huh? You can talk. So that has been, I think, the goal of our class, to be able to make a lot of people understand the intricacies and the depth of the Buddha and Dhamma, so that we can share. And there is one practice that we all need to cultivate, is to share whatever we learn, even with our immediate group of people or friends. And, that's how any thoughts are spread. So Sunandatai, that has been a very much intention behind this class. And as we will go ahead, more and more clarity will emerge, and a lot of people will be trained, I'm sure, to teach Buddhism.
No, definitely, we have really good future for Buddhism. Actually, it should go to the younger generation.
Yes.
Like, if they understand it, then it will be more effective and useful, because they need all this information. It's very necessary that they should know about all this.
True. I agree.
Jai Bhim. You explained very nicely all 10 paramitas. We have no doubt about the explanation and difficulty in understanding, but they are very difficult to follow for a common man.
That's true. See, Baba Ambedkar won't give us a very easy path. He is a taskmaster, no? He won't give you a very easy path that,
Yeah, only Baba Sahib could complete, I think, these 10 paramitas.
Yes.
After Buddha.
Yes. No, I think they have, if we think that the Buddha's Dhamma is something that is not possible, then I think, we reduce it down to another divine sort of teachings. I think what we get by practicing Buddhism, even if we practice a little bit of it, we begin to see the results. As the Buddha says that my Dhamma is beneficial in the beginning, beneficial in the middle, and beneficial.
Adi Kalyanam.
Yeah.
Adi Kalyanam, Madhya
Yeah.
Kalyanam.
So, we don't have to wait for the results for a long time. Sometimes if we practice a little bit of, like Anapanasati, or, even we read about Maitri or Karuna, it gives us so much happiness, so much joy, and like who won't get a joy if if we're thinking about the fellow feelings or human of our welfare of us and others. They are natural feelings for the human beings to feel good.
Yeah, that is true. That is true.
So yeah. Just like, so I think, they could do it, but if we say that they were some special people, they became special, of course, by working hard and by sacrificing their everything for the truth. They became great, no doubt they are great, but all of them, both of them have said that, there is, you can be that. And I think that is the greatest difference between Buddhism and other philosophies, that in other philosophies or other way of thinking, you cannot be that, you cannot become that, you cannot become divine in a sense, and there is always somebody who will govern your fate. But here in Buddhism, it is like you yourself can become the driver of your own life. I think that's a very beautiful thing about the Buddha's Dhamma.
Yeah, even if we start writing and following one seal, we feel that we have complete understanding, and we feel happy.
Actually, we experience the goodness of it. Like whenever we follow the Dhamma, we really experience the things, and we get the happiness, and that happiness we can definitely improve our lives.
Yeah.
And once we start learning, following, then our interest and affinity develops more and more.
Right.
Jai Bhim, sir. Samiksha here.
Jai Bhim.
Thank you for very beautiful explanation about the path of virtue. So as you were explaining about the Shila, and we should, gather all the definitions. So I just tried one more definition from Buddha in his Dhamma book itself, where Baba Sahib has given, that example of like what is Pradnya and Shila. Like Pradnya is necessary, but Shila is more necessary than Pradnya, wherein Baba Sahib also gave example like example of sword. Like Pradnya is the knowledge of sword, but the man with Shila is he knows like that sword can be used to save a man's life. So that is the significance attached to it. So that's what I wanted to reflect over. Thank you, sir. Yeah.
Samiksha, one of the exercises that you can do is find all the definitions of Shila in the Buddha's Dhamma.
Yes, sir.
Please do it, because it will be a good compilation.
Yeah.
I think ultimately what we need to do in this class as exercises is, find out, define all these terms. I would say that we have to analyze the Buddha's Dhamma in its entirety, as I was saying in the beginning, word by word, sentences by sentences, because it's something written by somebody who has such a profound experience in life. So I think we have to this, what I would say, analyze the words so that we know the mind of the person, the mind of the Baba Sahib himself. You see the heart of his being.
True. It is such a compact book, no? Each and every word is important.
Yes.
And it has deep.
Actually, the words which are given by Buddha, and those words are so effective that on one single word we can have a thesis on it. because there are so many things connected to those words, like Dhamma, then mind, Shila. So we can write a thesis on it. So vast.
Yes. The word Dhamma itself has 100 meanings in Buddhism.
Very true. Very true.
If you want to define the Dhamma, at least 100 ways you can define the Dhamma. And one of the things about the Buddha's teaching is that, though he defines things, these definitions are tentative, because then always you supersede those definitions. As you move on, you realize the depth of those terms. Like, for example, I was talking about the word like atom, for example. So for a layman, it has a very different connotation, but for a particle physicist, it's a very different connotation altogether. You see what I'm trying to say? For example, body is altogether a different connotation for somebody who is not a physiologist. For a doctor, body has a very, you see what I'm saying? So the word Dhamma has a lot of different connotation, just certain depth, certain wideness. And likewise, so it's not, even the definitions are not fixed. Because when we study Buddha Dhamma, we have to keep this simile of a raft in our mind. What Buddha says, my Dhamma is like a raft. It has to be used for crossing the stream. But after crossing the stream, you cannot, continue to hold it. And I think it has a very deep meaning that, we are not even supposed to, hold on to the Dhamma. We have to use it. We have to make it, serve the cause of the humanity. We have to make it serve the cause of our suffering. We cannot hold it. We cannot get even attached to the Dhamma. You see how deep that is?
True.
Very true.
Mangesh sir.
Yes, sir. Okay, bye.
Yeah. I was just going through the Art of Happiness by Dalai Lama. Just now I got connection with what you were explaining so nicely. Thank you for that. Very first.
Welcome.
What Dalai Lama is saying, the very purpose of life is to seek happiness. Okay. Now his happiness is through the path of purity, to the path of with the path of righteousness, and with the path of virtue.
Yes.
Okay. For that, he has given very good example of a small kid, how we see the things, that I like. That is why I want to share here. But he's saying a small kid, if you see his work is only to get up, drink milk, cry, and do that. But if we see with these things only, then it is not, the right thing to see the child. At the same time, the child, his smile of child in particular moments bring happiness to everyone, irrespective of his parent. It brings happiness to other. So if you have a right view, you can correlate the situation and see the things in positive perspectives.
Yes.
So that I wanted to share here. I linked it, that articles with yours.
Beautiful.
Here there is difference in a child. He has no prajna, means whatever he doesn't do any wrong thing, but he doesn't know that he is doing wrong thing or he is doing right thing.
Right.
Yes.
So I think that's the end of our class today. If you do not have anything to share, anybody would like to comment, share, or anybody is willing to share. So I think Dahiwale Sahib wanted to say.
Yes.
Sir.
Yes. Thank you so much. It was a nice lecture. I want to add something.
Please.
See, when I joined the government job, I decided that I will try to follow the 5 precepts that are given in Buddhism. But so first I started with, I will not tell lies. Then that Adinna Dana, I will not take anything, means I will be free from corruption like things. I will not take anything that is not given to me by somebody. So what I found that it becomes very difficult. People started isolating me.
Right.
Where I tried to follow this from that particular division or section, they transferred me to some other division
Right.
because they thought that this fellow is not cooperating with us,
Right.
because they will try to procure something
Mhm.
and they will some take away some portion of that. Okay, to which I will raise the objection because it is happening in front of me, because I am following that precept.
Right.
So what I mean to say, when certain person tries to follow like me, he tries to follow, he gets isolated from rest of the society,
Right.
and it becomes then difficult for him to survive.
Right.
So in such a situation, how to handle the people, it becomes very difficult.
Right.
Even if we try to convince, they are not ready to listen.
Yes.
You might have even seen some people, even in IS category, they try to become very honest and sincere. They have also tried to follow, and they are transferred after transferred or transferred
Right,
and
right,
transferred
right,
so many
right.
times within 5-6 months. 4 or 5 transfers they are taking place. So similar thing happened with me, and I now I am now thinking, means suspecting myself only, that is there something wrong with me?
Mhm. Right. No, as Sunil Bhau, we have seen that this path is not easy; it's very difficult, and I think I won't say that we have to compromise with these principles. They are the guidelines, as I said. As Baba Ambedkar said, that they are the standards, and they are the standards that we need to follow. And whatever you have talked about, they are also the general the part of the general ethical system. I would say the Constitution itself, and it's difficult. Whatever the situation you are in is a difficult thing, but I would say that the relationship matters. So if in an office, if you become an odd man out, in a sense of somebody who is not associated with, then there is either there is what Buddha called eko chare khagga visana kappo, just like live like a rhinoceros living alone. But we are social beings, so you have to find an outlet where you see, we cannot live without society.
Yes.
A human being, if you are in the office, nobody, if everybody boycotted you, how do you survive in that office?
Yes.
You cannot. So I think there are what is called in the Buddhist parlance upayas. Upaya. We can talk offline more about it. Upaya in a sense of the means, skillful means. And skillful means ultimately reflection of one's karuna, compassion. So, for example, there is this, if somebody is trying to trigger a button which will destroy the world, and you have a gun, what would you do as a Buddhist? Will you say that you will not kill that man who is just about to trigger a button to destroy the world?
We have to kill.
Right. So, I think
there is a principle called will to kill and need to kill.
Exactly. So I would say that you access, I think none of us is in a position to comment on your situation except, this thing. But I think you have to find, a need for you to be, I think you have to, sometimes it's called ethos. You have to blend with whatever is the, is the situation, to ease the situation for you and others. Otherwise, it can become very complicated in a sense. So let's talk. Maybe Alka Madam has something to share on this.
Their minds are all prejudiced. So whatever you tell, whatever you ask them to do, they will not accept. They won't accept.
Yes,
this
yes.
is so according to situation only we should advise. I think it happens with everyone,
yes,
even each and every person, official person of our community. So they are not just in acceptance mode.
But you never know, Sunil Bhau, that what kind of a change you are bringing by this. You see what I'm saying? Because sometimes what happens, if somebody is upright, they have I know a few officers who are very upright in the offices, and their mere presence causes people to streamline a lot of things.
Yes.
You see what I'm saying? People are so afraid of them. I know a few officers like that. Everybody's afraid of them.
Even if I am sitting in some meeting
Yeah.
without uttering a single word, my presence hurts. They think that I am taking many more things. I am observing, I am noting what wrongs they are doing. Even when they come to know this, they will not then involve me in such meetings.
I know, I understand.
That is happening. I have understood this since now. This is 25th year of my service. I have understood this thing.
Right. All right, brother, we will keep on talking. These are very interesting discussions.
Yes,
And,
yeah.
But thank you so much for.
But I have not left. I am there on that path.
You are keeping your adhishtan, no?
Yes. I have decided that let anything happen. Let them not give me promotion, no problem. I will be there.
Good. I think that's the spirit.
Oh, very. Same thing happened with Dr. Anil also.
Yes. He was a CGHS doctor. Yeah.
Areva, you know him.
Yeah, you have only written, madam, on your that post, in your post when he retired, na, you have given somewhat biodata of him.
Yeah.
And so from that I understood that he was in CGHS.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, then see you next week, all of you.
Yeah. Okay, Jai Bhim to everybody.
Namo Buddhaya. Thank
Namo
you.
Buddhaya.
With that, thank you.